Hello everyone, this is Bill Van Orsdel. Thanks for joining this Wednesday's webinar on what every self-publishing author should know about print on demand. I'm Bill Van Orsdel with WaveCloud. Up on the screen right now I've got my direct phone number and my direct email address. You are welcome after this presentation to give me a call or send me an email if you've got further questions or you'd like to see a set of the slides. I'm happy to send them, happy to share them. But let's go ahead and get started. Before we get started, I just want to let everybody know that I'm recording this session for playback later. We do this with all of our webinars. It's so that if you have to leave early or if you missed it, you can come back and take a look at what we did and also see some of the questions and the answers from our participants. Again, as I mentioned before, if you'd like the slides, I'm happy to send them. Just send me an email. I'll also show my email address as the very last slide today. And let's just do a quick checklist of assumptions. I'm assuming that you've already researched your target reader, you know your genre, you have or you're creating an ebook. Most self-published authors start with an ebook, and that you want to reach the broadest audience possible. The things we're going to talk about today are good for fiction or nonfiction. So we aren't going to talk specifically, except for in one instance, about what to do for fiction versus nonfiction authors. All of the things we're going to talk about are good for both. Just a quick word from our sponsor. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at WaveCloud, but this isn't a sales pitch. This is not a how to do it, but really a what to do. We've got services that help authors do print on demand, create interior print layouts, create print book covers, do author coaching. We do all that stuff, but there are plenty of authors who get those services elsewhere and are very successful. We just want authors to be successful, and just as a quick definition of that, whenever I talk to an author, and I talk to probably 2 or 3 every day, I always ask them to add to their goals the idea that they're going to earn out against the money that they spent self-publishing their book. So I say total up everything you spent on marketing, production, conversion, but leave out the minimum wage for all the time you spent writing your book, and measure that money that you spent out of pocket against the amount of revenue that you make in your book. And I say to authors, I say your goal should be to earn back at least that amount in your first 12 months. And then, of course, every book you sell after that is gravy. I also want this session today to be very, very interactive. So I'm going to launch a couple of polls. In fact, I'm going to launch the first one right now. I'm going to go ahead. You'll see it on your screen. If you just take a minute and click and let me know, how did you first hear about today's webinar? I'll share the results with everybody after everybody has a chance to vote on how you heard about it. I know that our emails have been very successful. We're also trying to reach out and connect with people via Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, and there's some other sources we use as well. But if you just take a moment and let me know, how did you hear about today's webinar? I'd appreciate it very much. All right, we've got about half of the people voting so far. If you haven't voted, go ahead and give it a shot. I'll give it about 30 more seconds, and then I'll close out the poll and share the results. And here's the poll, closing it out, and then I'll share it back to everybody. So it looks like our email list is great, and there's not really a mystery there. This is actually true for authors as well. Getting a permission-based email list is probably the best way to market your book, your services, your company, the information you want to share, and so no surprise that that worked for us as well here. All right, let's go on to the next slide, which is where I want to talk about the key points. And so in case you have to leave, and it happens, you've got to be somewhere, you've got to go to a plane, or you've got to pick up the kids or walk the dogs, or somebody comes to the front door, I'm going to tell you in advance what our recommendations are. I'll get back to these. I'll wrap up with these at the end, but I'll start with them in case you can't stay with us. So the very first one is that every author can benefit from a print-on-demand setup. You can reach more readers. The bottom line is that depending on your genre, as much as 70–80% of your readers like to buy your kind of books in print, and so an ebook won't reach them very well. And so having a print-on-demand version of your book available, even if it's only online, although we'll talk about how to make it available in bookstores, is pretty valuable. You also look more professional. So when they go to your Amazon.com sales page and they see that not only do you have an ebook, but you have a print book, you look a little more like a traditionally published book. And that's always helpful. There's still some stigma out there, there's no doubt about it, amongst people who say, well, I'd never read a self-published book. But as we advise all of our authors, you want to publish to professional standards, and one of them is you should have a print version of your book available. Second, print-on-demand setup isn't very expensive. Unlike the old days, right? The old days, I say almost before the internet, where you had to go to a printer, a short-run printer usually, and print, say, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 copies of your book at $2.50, $3, $5, $6 a piece. That's a significant outlay. We're talking you could easily hit $10,000 and then be stuck with a pallet full of books sitting in your garage or your spare room or your basement. But print-on-demand doesn't work that way. Print-on-demand is about creating the book at the time that it's ordered. It's very, very effective, and it isn't very expensive. We'll talk about what those expenses typically look like. You should know that when you go to create a print-on-demand book, that it's going to require more work and more elements. I'll talk about what those are, but there is a little more time or expense required when you do a print-on-demand book. Also, we recommend that when you do print-on-demand, that there are two places where you want to set your book up. That's in CreateSpace, which of course is a subsidiary of Amazon, and in the Ingram system. And Ingram has two choices, Ingram Spark, Ingram Lightning Source. We'll talk about those two choices and which one seems to make the most sense. I also recommend that to save costs and to help your book sort of be uniform across channels, that you pick a single common trim size. So we'll talk about what that is and what that means if you're not familiar with it. But you want to pick one trim size to use both in CreateSpace and in the Ingram system. And then, of course, you want to give some thought. The same way you gave some really detailed thought and analysis to how you price your ebook, give the same kind of methodical, intentional analysis to how you price your print-on-demand book correctly. So I'll take a moment and pause. If anyone's got any questions before we get any further, I'll even go ahead and launch Survey 3. I noticed that a couple of you have already asked questions, or you already responded in the question section. Thank you very much. Let me show you the survey. I'd like to get a sense of, are you thinking about print-on-demand? Do you already have one? Are you in the course of doing one? Let me know, because it'll change the depth to which I go into some of these topics. And we might skip over the easy stuff or spend more time on the basics. So if you would, take a look at the poll and let me know if you've done a short print run already. Maybe you're planning on print-on-demand. You haven't made up your mind. Tell me where you are in your process, and I appreciate it very much. All right, we've got about 2/3 having voted. Anyone else want to chime in? All right, great. I'm going to go ahead and close the survey. I'll share the results so you can see where you are with your peers. And so here we go. Most of our callers today are planning on but haven't executed their print-on-demand version yet. We've got one section of you, about 10%, they already have it, and another 10% that haven't made up their minds. Okay, so that's good to know. All right, we're going to move on to why is this important? So why do I care about print-on-demand? There's so many tasks, there are so many questions and things to think about as a self-published author when you're bringing your book to market. Why is this one worth any attention? Why does it matter? Well, depending on genre, many of your readers will prefer to read the print version of your book. This is especially important if you have a nonfiction book. So nonfiction, just if you look at the statistics from traditional publishers, and of course Amazon doesn't share their statistics, but if you look at what traditional publishers are experiencing on a genre-by-genre basis, typically it's rare for a nonfiction genre, lose weight or be a better public speaker or how to find a job. It's rare for a book to get a nonfiction book to have more than 30% of its book be consumed in an ebook format. So that means that if you've got a nonfiction book out there and you don't produce a print-on-demand version, you're totally missing the opportunity to address 70% of your market. Now, for nonfiction, it varies pretty widely. I think the statistics really are all over the place. I think science fiction and romance typically have very, very good uptake by readers in ebook formats. So it's not as critical that you do print-on-demand in those two genres. But based on how easy it is and how simple it is, and based on, I would kind of like to have a print copy of my own book in my hands after I write it, print on demand's pretty inexpensive, pretty easy to set up. So your goal is reach more of your readers by offering the format they prefer. More readers, more sales, more positive worth, more sales. It's a wonderful cycle once you can get into it. And of course, as I mentioned before, your books look more professional to people that are browsing around in Amazon. Maybe they've heard about your book. They go to your book sales page. And the fact that you have both a print version and an ebook just looks more professional. I've got a question here from Mike. He's asking what Ingram is. We'll talk about Ingram in a minute. The short answer, Mike, is that Ingram is is one of the two major United States distributors of trade publication books. Trade pubs are probably the books that we're all writing. If you're not writing a textbook or something equally specialized, the typical books that you'd find in a Barnes & Noble are almost all trade publications. And usually, Barnes & Noble will get those books from a wholesaler such as Ingram or Baker and Taylor. Samantha's got a question here. She says, do you have any stats for straight horror, or does that mirror science fiction? Samantha, my guess is that it would be close to science fiction. You know, it's funny, there's an anecdote that the overwhelming majority of the sales of 50 Shades of Grey were ebooks. And one of the rationales given for that was the idea that nobody wanted to be seen reading 50 Shades of Grey, but it was okay if it's on your e-reader because no one can see what you're actually reading. So you have to ask yourself, Samantha, about your readers, and I might say the same thing about the people that I write my book for, science fiction readers. Are they a little sensitive about people knowing what kind of book they're reading? And how would horror readers feel about that? So my guess is that the split, the uptake among genre readers for horror is probably more like science fiction than it is like nonfiction books. Thanks for the questions. So I talked before about print-on-demand setup, and is it expensive or isn't it? It's really not that expensive. Typically, what I advise the authors that we work with is that when you're having your ebook cover created, when you're having your ebook conversion done, so you're having it created in an EPUB or a Mobi or a PDF or Smashwords friendly version, that you also go ahead and do the incremental cost for the print-on-demand setup as well. Because basically for print-on-demand, here's what you need. You need a press-ready PDF version of your book cover. So, of course, a print book cover has a front face, a spine, and a back face. And when the service, whether you use WaveCloud or somebody else, when they give you back a file, they're going to give you a PDF file. But it's a very specific kind of PDF file. It's in the X1 or X2 or X3 format. It's called press ready, meaning it's ready to be sent directly to a printing press. It's typically higher resolution, higher dots per inch setting. So that's one of the two files you need to do print on demand. The second file that you need to do print on demand is the interior layout, the text. So laying out the text for a print on demand file is different than an ebook file because you've got to have headers, you've got to have page numbers, and it's just a little more complex, but it's not that much more complex. And if the artist or the conversion specialist already has your file open and they're working on it, you know, I recommend going ahead and just having the print-on-demand stuff done at the same time. So, you know, as you can tell, at least when we help customers, it's adding an interior layout format to your conversion request. It's $75 to $150 more, depending on the size of your book. Getting the print cover done at the same time your ebook cover is done, that can be $100 to $200 more. Yes, there's a little more content for the back cover, but generally you're going to create that. And we'll talk about what some of those elements are that go on the back cover. But you know, you have to create the blurb on the back of your book. You're probably going to provide the images that go on the back of the book. When the ebook creator is working on the images on the front or the color palette on the front, they can wrap that around the back pretty easily. When you use Ingram, when you go set up your book in the Ingram system, there's a fee, and that fee is usually between, depending on whether you use Spark or Lightning Source, and again, I'll talk about what those two are in a moment. That fee is $45 for Spark, $75 for Lightning Source. And CreateSpace has no setup fee. So the bottom line is that it's like free to set up print on demand in CreateSpace. And we'll talk about why you want CreateSpace versus Ingram. Okay, so I talked before about print covers and how they've got more work to them and some more elements. Why do they cost more money than just the ebook? So number one, of course, it's because you've got two more faces, if you will, to the book. So you've got the spine and you've got the back cover. And also, I talked with a lot of authors about this. There might be a good reason for your ebook cover to be slightly different from your print book cover. Not dramatically different, but slightly different. And here's the core reason. The reason would be that perhaps you've won an award, or perhaps you have a subtitle to your book, excuse me, or perhaps you have your benefit promise, or you've got a blurb from another author or reviewer that you want to show on the front of your book. Typically, on an ebook cover, there's not enough space to blow up that text or that award bug or whatever extra element you'd want to add to the front of your book and have it appear correctly without crowding your composition on your ebook. But when you go to your print version, there is enough room. And so it's always worth considering making your ebook cover a little bit, your print book cover a little bit different from your ebook cover, depending on those elements. But let's talk about the other things that go into a print cover. So on the back, if you've got a piece of fiction that you've written, you've got to have your log line and your hook. And if you're not familiar with what these are, essentially the log line is the 2 or 3, 4 sentences, maybe 2 paragraphs at the very most, that describes your conflict, your setting, your main characters, and ends with a question, your hook. You know, will she survive? Will she get the man? Will they repel the alien invasion? You know, will they discover the source of the blood in the basement? Whatever the answer is. So on the back, you absolutely need the impulse text that causes the browser, when they see your book at the back of the bookstore or on a bookshelf or the back of your room where you're speaking or on the display table, they pick up, they read the back, and they say, you know, I'd really like to know the answer to that question, to that hook. I think I'll buy this book. Similarly, if you have a nonfiction book, on the back of your book has to be a restatement of your benefit promise, and your benefit promise was on the front as well, and your credentials. So on the front of your book, it might say, lose 20 pounds in 20 days. I could benefit from a book like that. And on the back, it'll go into more detail. Lose 20 pounds in 20 days by eating nothing but potato soup. And here's why it works, and here's why I'm the person you can believe that statement from. So I've got a question from Mike. Will the print-on-demand printer provide their specifications, or are they pretty standard for the layout? So Mike, the short answer is that yes, there are some detailed standards that you can collect from both Ingram and from CreateSpace. I'll talk about trim size in a moment, but absolutely there's a set of standards and even some pre-built templates that you could give a cover designer so that they could do exactly the job you want and have a file that you can be certain that CreateSpace would accept. So Joseph asks his question, my book is inspirational, autobiographical. How would I do the back blurb? So Joseph, it's essentially you've got a book that has a benefit promise. You just have to articulate what it is. And the benefit promise might be something like, you know, read my book about how I overcame cancer and find the courage to do so yourself. I don't know, I'm making that up. I don't know what your experience is, Joseph, but you have to think clearly about what is your benefit promise and be able to articulate that both on the front cover and on the back cover, and when you do it on the back cover, do it with more detail. On the back cover of your book, you're typically going to want to continue your front cover image, your theme, your palette of colors. You're going to wrap them through the spine all the way into the back of the cover. You must list on your book the genre. So your genre might be horror, or it might be urban paranormal, or it might be inspirational or autobiography. The reason you put the genre on the back of your book is because if you get some sort of distribution deal in a store, even if it's just as simple as you went down to your local bookstore and they've got a pure consignment offer, having the genre on the back of your book lets somebody who doesn't know you, hasn't read your book, and frankly may not be able to figure it out by looking at your book, know exactly where you, the author, intended it for it to be in the bookstore. So, of course, that means that you've already done this research about your genre, you've been to a bookstore, and you figured out where your book should sit. Definitely put the genre on the back of your book. You also want a valid EAN barcode. And the question about whether it should include price or not is a little bit tricky. You can go to a bookstore and pick up and see back of the book pricing, yes or no. It depends. What I would do is I would use your genre research to answer this question. When you go to the bookstore, look at all the books in your genre that you consider to be competition and see if they include the price in their ISBN or somewhere on the back of their book. Some do, some don't. What you should do is follow the trend that they use. I've got a question here from Ann Osborne. Should we be coming up with a name to publish under other than the author name? That's an excellent question. I think that might be from Kathy or Chai. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing that properly. But the short answer is yes. Even if it's a sole proprietorship, then you definitely want to have an imprint name or a publisher name. You want to look like a traditionally published book, even on your ebook, by the way, so that when you go and look at your ebook listing in Amazon, you prefer that it show. For example, I made up a publisher name for my book, and the publisher of my book, which is my company, will be Singularity Press. So, I write science fiction. Singularity is a science fiction concept. So there you go. It took a little bit of creativity, a couple glasses of wine, and I had a name for my publisher. You should absolutely use a publisher name. And, as you probably jumped ahead a little bit, yes, you should have a publisher name, a publisher imprint, and maybe even a publisher logo on the back of your book. Also, remember that your spine width, which is one of the 3 faces of your back cover, is going to be dependent on your print layout number of pages. So you actually have to have your print layout done first, and you have to go look in the CreateSpace or in the Ingram system, pick a paper stock type, and then they'll tell you, based on the number of pages and your spine width is X, you have to give that information to your book cover designer so they can adjust your press-ready PDF file appropriately. Okay. So where to set up your POD? So I've talked a lot about CreateSpace, Ingram Spark, and Lightning Source. Let's talk about those 2 or 3, depending on how you want to slice it, entities. So first of all, as I said before, CreateSpace is a subsidiary of Amazon. I think they were called BookSurge when Amazon bought them some years ago. The benefit of loading your book into the CreateSpace print-on-demand system is that it shows as in stock in the Amazon store. So there's no other way to guarantee that your book is going to show up as in stock on the Amazon store. If you've got a potential reader who comes to your page and wants the print version because they don't like ebooks, and they want to order the print version that says, out of stock, we'll restock in 2 or 3 weeks, they're probably not going to order your book. But if it's in stock, that's what you want. It also shows up on your book sales page as a format option. So now you're familiar when you go shop at Amazon, and if you haven't, you need to, even if you don't like them, even if you consider them to be evil. You have to understand they're going to be a major distribution channel for you, so you need to go get very familiar with them. Go look at some books and notice that how they treat multiple formats on a single book sales page. It lets you aggregate all your reviews in one place, and you just look more professional. When you set it up in CreateSpace, even though it's free, don't select expanded distribution. And the reason is simple. You will make less money when you sell it through bookstores, and bookstores, seeing that your bookstore is available from CreateSpace or Amazon, they are less likely to want to order your book. So there are many bookstores, especially independent bookstores, who sort of view Amazon as the barbarians at the gate. And if someone walks into the bookstore and says, "I'd like to order a copy of your book," and they look and they see it's a CreateSpace, they might say, well, we can't get that for you. So now let's talk about the other option. After you've set it up in CreateSpace, which I would do first, then I would also give Ingram a thought. And here's why. As I mentioned before, Ingram is one of the 2 largest wholesalers of print books in the United States. And they've set up a print-on-demand operation. So if I'm a typical bookstore in the United States, there's a pretty good chance that I have an account with Ingram. And what does that mean? That means that if someone hears about your book, maybe they hear about it at church, they hear about it at school, they hear about it at work, they hear about it online somewhere, they hear about it on your page, and they want to order a print copy, and they want to support their local bookstore, then what they'll do is they'll walk down to their local bookstore and they'll say, "Hey, I'd like to order a copy of The Listener by Bill Van Orsdel. Do you have that in stock? I didn't see it on the shelf." And the clerk will open up their system and they'll look it up and they'll say, "Gosh, I don't have that book, but I can order it. It'll be here in a couple of days. Would you like me to order it for you?" And most people who've done this before will say, "Sure, go ahead and order it." So that's the number 1 benefit of being in Ingram Spark or in Lightning Source. Also, Ingram Spark and Lightning Source both offer a wider selection of discount and return options than CreateSpace. One of the things you may not know about the book industry, the retail book industry, is that most of the books that are on the shelf at Barnes & Noble and other bookstores, they are not owned by the bookstore. They have the right to return them for a full refund within 90 days of putting them on the shelf. That means that if you expect to get your book into bookstores, even if you have a great marketing plan, your book has to be returnable. So you have that option. You can set those options, especially at Lightning Source, to follow the industry norms for returns. Now, what's the difference between Ingram Spark and Lightning Source? Basically, they are the exact same backend, but Ingram found that self-published authors were having trouble using Lightning Source because Lightning Source isn't set up to be necessarily easy to use. It's got a higher fee. They're kind of tired of answering all the technical support questions that first-time authors have when they try to get their book up into the Ingram system through Lightning Source. So they set up this other operation called Ingram Spark. It's cheaper to set up in Ingram Spark. There are fewer sales options and fewer pricing options, but in theory it's easier and cheaper to get going in Ingram Spark. A lot of self-published authors do that. I would recommend that if you are serious about this, that if you think you're going to have more than one book, I would try to, when we do this for authors, we do it through Lightning Source. So when you sign up with WaveCloud for us to do distribution for you, we do it through Lightning Source. You should go to Lightning Source if you're serious about having more than a few books, or you plan to have more than a few books, and set up an account. It is more expensive to get started, but you have much better discounting and pricing options available to you when you use Lightning Source. And when you go to Lightning Source, essentially, tell them you're a small press or a small publisher. You might get some pushback. You might have to ask 3 times, but you can get yourself set up in Lightning Source. If you expect to be selling a lot of print-on-demand books, I would definitely take a look at the benefits of Lightning Source over Ingram Spark. Okay, any questions about Ingram or Ingram Distribution or Ingram Spark or Lightning Source or CreateSpace? That's a lot of info about those 2 options. All right, I mentioned before about trim size, and we talked about the standards that your print-on-demand system want you to use. So trim size is essentially the measurements of the front cover of your book. And my guess is that your genre has a standard. And you have to decide after you go find out what that standard is, as an author, do I buck the trend or do I follow the standard? Do people who like to buy memoirs, do they buy them in 6x9 format? Do people who like to buy mass market paperbacks, do they buy them in 5x8 or 5 1/4 by 8? What does it look like in my genre? How do I want my book to look on the shelf? Like a mass market paperback, like a trade paperback? Here are the common set of trim sizes. And when I say common, these are common between CreateSpace and Ingram. So when you tell your interior layout designer and your print designer to use your trim size target of 5x8 inches or 7x10 inches, they'll produce a single file for the print cover and a single file for the interior layout that you can use at both sources. So they only have to do the work one time. It's cheaper. And you can see that they've got different size limits based on which paper type you choose. This just happens to be from CreateSpace. So when you visit CreateSpace, they can give you templates. They can give you templates to give to your cover designer. Our cover designers and our interior layout people use those to help create good-looking print layout book, good-looking print layout, interior layout, and good-looking book covers. But these are the trim sizes you have to start with when you go to make your decision about what to do next. Then the last topic, pricing your print-on-demand version competitively. So, this is sort of a rehash of the conversation we have about ebooks. What is your genre and competition doing? And I say competition, it's not really competition, but what are the other authors, the leading authors in your genre doing with pricing for their ebook, for their print book? What you'll find when you set up a POD solution is that it's very inexpensive, and that so we've got an author right now. His book is doing very, very well. He sold, I think he sold 1,300 copies since the last week in December. So his book's only been out about 30 days, and of those, about 30% are in print. And he went and picked a trim size that matched well with what other books in his genre. This happens to be a book on investing. And he used that as both his pricing guide and his trim size guide. He looked at what are my competitors doing. So he decided to go with the trend to make his book look like the other ones that are out there. And also remember this, when you set your print-on-demand price, that Amazon will show your ebook price as a discount from it. So for example, I just went in and pulled a book by Simon & Schuster, a pretty popular book. It's got 1,400 customer reviews, so it's probably sold tens of thousands of copies. And you know, their print list price is $24, but the Kindle price, at least for the moment while it's on sale, is $1.99. And so people look at that. They look at the you'll save 92% and they say, okay, I like that. So by having a print book, you make your ebooks look even better. Okay, so you know, today's is a little bit shorter than usual. So I'm looking at Mike. He says, I'm looking at these prices, and I would first think it's terrible. Mike, I might agree that a book that was priced at $24, put $1.99 on sale, might be terrible. I can't remember the name of this book that I pulled for this. I think it might have been a science fiction book. And I think what's going on here is that Simon & Schuster, of course, one of the big 5 publishers out there, is learning how to experiment with pricing flexibility. So it used to be that the big publishers didn't want to discount, didn't want to authorize Amazon to do any discounts, and they had this thing called the agency model for which the Department of Justice prosecuted them all. And now that the lawsuit's been settled, some of the big 5 are learning how to do promotional pricing. So my guess is that this book is normally I'll guess a $10 or $14 ebook, and they've temporarily knocked it down to $2 to try and prop up some sales and keep some sales momentum. Momentum is going. And you know, Mike's point is don't overprice your print book. Absolutely right. You know, I started to tell you about our author that has sold about 1,300 books since the end of December, and at first he priced his print book at $14.99, and then he's knocked it down to $9.99. And on a book his size, and it's not a mystery, when you see it in CreateSpace, it costs him about $5.07 every time he sells one. So if he's got a $9.99 book, you know, he's making a decent royalty, and $9.99 versus his ebook version, you know, still makes it look good. So you're absolutely right. You have to think critically about how you do your print-on-demand pricing. So back to the final recommendations. This is where we started. I hope you'll agree every author can benefit from a print-on-demand setup. There are still plenty of readers out there that don't have reading devices yet, or have them and don't want to use them as reading devices. You know, they've got tablets, and so they haven't converted over to the digital world yet. And with print-on-demand, you can reach more readers. You can definitely look more professional on your website. Let's see, I've got another question here from Chai. It says, I write romance. Standard romance is smaller size than Christian romance. What if I don't want to pigeonhole? So I think that's an excellent question. In the right way to say it, if you expect most of your sales to be ebook sales, I wouldn't stress too much about your trim size choice, and about whether you want to break the mold or not. So I think it's okay to have a larger trim size. I think one of the things that you're going to want to think about as well, and this goes for everyone, when you're doing your interior layout, you know, let your interior layout designer select your font. They'll probably use one of the same fonts that we've been using, or the same font family that we've been using in this industry for the last 1,200 years. But talk critically with them about point size, about font size. And then when you start talking about font size, the next question that's going to come up is, well, what does that do to my page count? What does that do to my print-on-demand base cost? So there's a little bit of calculation to do there, but we've got, in the United States anyway, we've got an aging reading population, and I think the trend away from super small type toward more readable type is coming, and this is unavoidable. Mike's got another question. He says, what about distribution? They print to order, but do they send to the customer or to the author? So, Mike, that's an excellent question. There's actually CreateSpace actually serves 2 functions. One, they send the book directly. It's literally across the street from the Amazon shipping warehouse. So the CreateSpace print-on-demand facility is across the street. They print the book every day. They put a bunch of them on the pallet, and they send them next door to the shipping department, and they go directly to the person that ordered them. But we also have authors that have done nonfiction books and some fiction books who say, hey, I want to send out, like the author I was just talking about, hey, I want to send out 10 copies to reviewers, and I want to send them print copies. You know, here's a list of all the people to send them to. You can go right into CreateSpace, and you can set up, you can tell them to send those books directly to those recipients, or you can say, hey, send me 10 of them, and I'll send them myself. So that way you can stick a bookmark in there or a nice note or whatever it is that you want to do. So, Mike, the answer is that they'll ship either directly to the customer or they'll ship to you. Another thing that we have some authors do is that, especially if they're early in the game and they're doing reviews or they want to pump up sales a little bit, if you're sending out a bunch of review copies, whether they're ebooks or whether they are print books, it's okay to use that the gift button there at the top of the Amazon page to gift a print or gift an ebook version to someone. It counts in your sales, and then when they go and do a review, it shows as an Amazon verified purchaser. So that's always valuable as well. Robert's got a question. He says, is color worth the cost? I would say I'd say color is worth the cost if you have a book with a lot of color images. If you've just got some text that's got if you've got a few elements of text that are in a different highlighted color, then I'm not certain about whether it's worth the cost. I do know that it's more expensive. But Robert, if you want to, private message me or send me an email later with a sample of the book or with more details, I'll be happy to answer that because I think it's different for everyone. And then Mike says, that's what I was thinking, distributing using a writer's guide to target and promote offline. Absolutely, Mike. It's very common to use either Ingram or CreateSpace to order a bunch of your books, especially if you're a nonfiction author. It's very common to go to CreateSpace or go to Ingram and say, hey, I need you to drop ship 100 copies of this book to this hotel, this venue where I'm going to be speaking, because I'm going to sell them at the back of the room. So it's very common to use those services for that purpose. I've got a question here by Toxie. What about publicity? Publicity is not really the focus of today's webinar. Publicity really depends a lot on your target market, how well you define your reader base, and what I tell authors is if it's fiction, there's probably a launch that you want to do for your ebook and your print book, and then you want to maybe spend a few weeks flogging your book to your various networks, maybe to a blog tour, but then sort of I would go on and start writing more and write the next book. For nonfiction, it's very different. Nonfiction is about platform building and about permission-based email lists and links at the end of the book. Toxie, I think your book, if I recall correctly, is a fiction book. So that's my basic advice, which is get out there and connect with your audience, but don't flog it too hard. Okay, just finishing up with the final recommendations. So print on demand isn't very expensive. As you saw before, you might add a couple of $100s to the cost of what you're doing, and it gives you a whole other format to work with. It's also nice to get a copy of your book in your own hands that's real. You can put up on your shelf and show to your friends at dinner parties. But do remember that creating a print cover and to some degree an interior print layout requires more work, and there's more elements to it. So whether you do it yourself or whether you hire someone else, be ready with those elements. We recommend that at the very least you do CreateSpace, and that if you want good availability in bookstores, do Ingram as well. But if you're going to do both of them, CreateSpace and Ingram, don't select either of their expanded distribution options. Pick a single common trim size that'll work in both systems. That way your providers or yourself only have to create one set of files. And of course, think critically and methodically about your print-on-demand pricing. And then Samantha says, hey, I'd really like to see a webinar on launching a book. Samantha, thank you for the suggestion. I'd like to put together one of those as well. I'm going to go ahead and launch survey number 4 real quick. Let's see. I'm really curious if we are doing these webinars at a time that makes sense for everybody. If you would, just let me know what time zone you're in now. And then after you tell me that, I'm going to ask you to tell me what time in your time zone seems to work the best for you. So I'm going to go ahead. It looks like I've got about half the people have voted. There's 2/3 of the votes, and almost up to 100%. Okay, I'll close it. If you're curious, I'll share it so you can see where everybody is. Looks like almost half of our folks are on the East Coast. I hope that, oops, it didn't pop up very well, did it? It looks like about half our folks are on the East Coast. I hope that you're all keeping warm. That's all I can say about that. Wow, looking at the snow today. And then also, if you would, just let me know what time zone, what time in your time zone that would be the best time to do a webinar for you. Is it during the day? Is it after working hours? Is it, I mean, we haven't tried to do any on the weekend yet, but maybe we should. But I'd be curious what seems to work the best. All right, fantastic. We've got everybody voted. That's great. So just to wrap up, of course, here's again, my phone number, my email address. You are welcome to reach me directly with any questions you might have. Oops, I just ended the slideshow. Didn't mean to do that. But please feel free to give me a call or an email if there's anything else we can do to help you. I wish you the best of luck with your print-on-demand books. If you need any help with them, we offer some of these services, and we're happy to help. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. I appreciate your support. Have a great day.